In this lecture, I'm going to be giving an overview of the tradition of Ayurveda. Ayurveda is one of the oldest continuous medical systems that exists in the world, and it emerges out of the Indian subcontinent. It literally means, Ayurveda is a Sanskrit word. It means literally science of life or wisdom of life. And so it's a holistic system, and it partakes of many, many different aspects of health and healing that I'll be looking at. So this includes things like diet, sleep, massage, herbs, all of these aspects. So Ayurveda is still a central part of the healing systems of India. India does have biomedical hospitals, obviously, but it also has Ayurvedic clinics. They're very, very common throughout India. So this is a photograph of a contemporary Ayurvedic clinic in New Delhi in North India. And so you can see this is a very modern looking version of a clinic. So typically clinics will obviously be staffed by Ayurvedic physicians or Vaids, and they have to train for many, many years in order to be a licensed Ayurvedic physician. And often at these clinics, they will be dispensaries for herbs as well. So you can get diagnosed and then given the herbs in one trip. Typical modes of diagnosis include pulse diagnosis. So the Ayurvedic physician would be trained in the art of pulse diagnosis. Also, it's very common to look at the tongue to make a diagnosis, and to look at the eyes. And so this is very much a kind of hands-on observational mode of medicine. It's not about sending somebody out to get a test from a machine. It's done through the physician, and a trained Ayurvedic physician, for instance, can typically tell your dosha. I'll be talking about that. Your dosha is your constitution. They can pretty much tell just by looking at you. So this is, as I said, this is very much a kind of hands-on technique. Along with the taking of herbs, another very common practice within Ayurveda is abhyanga, or oil massage, and this may be part of what's called pachakarma, which is a kind of detoxifying process. Oftentimes, when people are going through this, they will go to an Ayurvedic retreat to have it done, because it's quite an elaborate process of detoxing. It can be you kind of need a lot of rest while you're doing it, but massage is something that can be done outside of a retreat center, and also self-massage is often prescribed, typically early in the morning. If we think back to that image of Lord Dhanvantari holding the herbs, we see that that is a pillar of Ayurveda, and so he was associated with bringing Ayurveda to the material plane. And so the herbs, there are specific herbs, but there's also just regular cooking herbs. So it's interesting to see that a lot of just normal Indian cooking partakes of these Ayurvedic principles of mixing together various tastes. Which is very much an Ayurvedic concept for balancing the doshas. So you can see here the person with the mortar and pestle. This is still very common in terms of cooking, but also of creating, mixing herbs together, that you grind them yourself. So the idea that the herbs, the fresher they are, the better, the more efficacious they are. Picture of an Ayurvedic retreat in India, and so this is a very high-end Ayurvedic retreat. Not all of them are this fancy, but I just wanted to give you an example here. And so there's a lot of Ayurvedic retreats in South India, and so they're often in nature. So again, that idea that nature itself is healing and helps us to balance. And so people may take a week, 2 weeks, and go on a retreat for their health to on one of these retreats. And I've noticed that they're also marketing it to people outside of India as a kind of travel combined with a retreat. Now about the doshas in Ayurveda, and this usually gets translated into English as constitution. And so I'm going to be inviting you to do an online quiz to determine what dosha you are, because I can't see you. And I'm at the point where I can often tell just by looking, but so I'm going to, if you want to, obviously, if you don't want to, you don't have to, you can do the quiz. And according to Ayurveda, you're born with a dosha. You can't really change it. You can just balance it. And it's really important to note that there's no better dosha. They're equal. They just have certain strengths and weaknesses to them. And so when I do it in class, I do a kind of party trick where I predict the doshas of everybody, because generally, if it's an academic setting, there's one dosha that predominates. Now, I have a lot of nurses in this class, so it might be a little bit more mixed, but I'll be interested if you're willing to share if you tell us what your dosha is, and if this seems, I'm going to go through some of the characteristics and if this seems accurate. To Ayurvedic doshas, the body type, there's a body type, an emotional type, also to each dosha. And so I've just chosen this image of a dancer. And so it's very typical for artistic people to be this dosha, Vata dosha. And so you can see the lightness of the frame, kind of light boned person, and it's very slim. So I've chosen a ballet dancer because they're a very sort of extreme version of this type. There's obviously a range within it. Associated with Vata dosha are dry, light, rough, and mobile. And so these are the kind of more fundamental aspects of the dosha. And as I was saying, this is deriving from kind of larger philosophy. So these are elements within nature. It's not just within the human body, and because the human body, of course, is part of nature. So Vata is typified, this will make more sense as we go along, by dry, light, rough, and mobile qualities. So the qualities of Vata are thin, light frame and excellent agility. Their energy comes in bursts, and they are likely to experience sudden bouts of fatigue. Vatas typically have dry skin, so you see that element of dryness might manifest in a Vata person in the skin and hair, and cold hands and feet. They sleep lightly, and their digestion can be sensitive. And so I'll just give an example of somebody I knew who I would say would have this dosha. And so, for instance, if somebody told a joke and he laughed, he would lose his appetite. So it's a very kind of delicate appetite, which we're going to see is not true of other doshas. So this idea that the energy comes in bursts, and I just wanted to say that when you're balancing, you often have to do something of the opposite. And so I'll be getting to that as we move through here. Typical of Vatas to love excitement and to crave new experiences and variety. That's very common quality that they have. They're quick to anger, but also to forgive. And when Vatas are in balance, they're energetic, creative, and flexible. Okay, so this is a very important idea, that what does the dosha look like when it's in balance? What does it look like when it's out of balance? Also, it's typical that they're creative thinkers. They take initiative and are lively. When unbalanced, they're prone to worry and anxiousness and often suffer from insomnia. So that idea that what the dosha looks like when it's in balance is very different from what it looks like when it gets out of balance and these qualities are exaggerated. So I'm going to tell you the hard truth here, according to Ayurveda, and it has been my experience, this is indeed true, that often what the constitution of the person craves is the exact opposite of what's good for them, especially if they're out of balance. There's the concept within Ayurveda that when you're out of balance, you start craving things that are actually not good for you. So there's this kind of taking it on faith that if the Ayurvedic physician says do this, you do it, because your own body, if it's out of balance, is not necessarily sending you the signals that are helpful. Now that will change as the body comes into balance. So Vata is balanced by regular schedules and eating and sleeping, and it's been my experience that this is precisely what they don't like. Vata people tend to reject schedules and to want to be spontaneous, and so this can feel very burdensome to them, but in fact it's pacifying for the dosha. It solidifies the dosha. Warmer, heavier foods like stews and soup are good for Vata, and again, it's been my experience that Vata will tend to be attracted to, at least when they're out of balance, they'll often go without eating for long periods of time, and they'll also be attracted to more, like, say, like super quote unquote clean food, like raw food. And raw food diets from an Ayurvedic perspective are really bad for Vata. And so this we really have to focus on, and I find it very helpful, this idea that you can't always just go by your craving. Also good for Vata are warm spices like ginger, cinnamon, and so on that balance Vata. So they should also be kept physically warm. They have a tendency, as I said earlier, to feel cold, to have cold hands and feet. So staying warm, eating warm food, drinking warm drinks is very good for Vata. Somebody with a more Kapha constitution, and so this is typically somebody who's larger boned, heavier set body. And so again, as I said, the idea is that you're born with a certain constitution, and a number of you have been talking in your papers about the way that our society is fixated that everybody has to have a small, thin body, particularly for women. And this is just not the case, obviously. And so from an Ayurvedic point of view, that's ludicrous. You're born with a certain constitution, and you have to work to balance the constitution that you're born with. Qualities of Kapha are heaviness, slowness, steadiness, solidity, cold, soft, oily. So as you saw with the Vata, these are these kind of fundamental qualities that we associate with this typology and this constitution. Kaphas typically have a strong body and excellent stamina. They'll often have large soft eyes and thick hair. They're also, they tend to sleep very soundly and to have good digestion. And in fact, this is one of the issues for Kapha, that often they sleep too much. So it's the opposite of Vata, which is often a problem with insomnia. If Kapha were to have a problem with sleep, it's often that they're oversleeping, and that leads to a kind of lethargy. So again, we have to always be adjusting according to the dosha. When they're out of balance, Kapha types may become overweight. They may sleep excessively, and syndromes that are associated with excessive Kapha are asthma, diabetes, and depression. So each constitution has these kind of, as I said, these weaknesses within them, and they have strengths within them. So for Kapha is these would be typically what to watch out for in terms of trying to balance them. For balancing Kapha, an Ayurvedic physician would say to eat light, warm foods. Actually, in all Ayurveda is the idea of warm food, so it's out of alignment with that kind of raw food idea. So typically, in all the doshas, you're eating cooked food. So with pungent, bitter, astringent tastes. Now, in my experience, Kapha people tend not to like those kind of tastes. They tend to like sweet. So again, that idea that at least in the beginning, you kind of have to force yourself to do it. But the idea that these types of tastes actually balance the dosha. And so we find the idea of the 5 tastes within Indian cooking and Ayurvedic thought that actually a balanced meal should have all the tastes. And so Ayurvedic thinkers would say that the Western diet typically is far too overbalanced in terms of sort of oil, salt, sugar, and doesn't have a lot of this bitter, pungent taste. So some of you may know diets where, for instance, they'll eat kimchi or pickles of various kinds. Those would be kind of pungent tastes. Also, probably the only astringent taste or bitter taste that we tend to have in Western diet is coffee, and I think that's probably why it's so popular, because it's really the only form of bitter that we seem to consume in Western culture, or Canadian culture, I should say. So balancing Kapha, they should avoid sweets, butter, oil as much as possible. So again, obviously delicious foods that many of us enjoy. So this idea that there's a tendency to, oh, I've got a typo there, just ignore that, that they're best avoided. And then herbs that pacify Kapha are ginger, turmeric, triphala, and there's many more, but the idea, these are easily available. So so cooking with ginger, cooking with turmeric. And again, some of you may be aware, this is a very annoying thing that happens where suddenly turmeric is being touted as the great miracle ingredient. Whereas from an Ayurvedic point of view, it's one of many ingredients and herbs that are good for certain doshas. And so it's not a magic bullet, but it's definitely a very important part of Ayurvedic diet. Can also benefit from regular invigorating exercise, and it's interesting to see again with Vata, the physician might say don't over exercise. There may be a tendency with Vatas to over exercise, and this is actually not good for them. So really, judging everybody individually in terms of where they are in terms of their constitution. And new experiences are good for Kaphas who may have a tendency to fall into a rut. So again, the opposite of Vata. Vatas will tend to want to constantly be experiencing new things and being stimulated, and that can be bad for them. The opposite is true for Kapha. They often will want to do the same thing over and over again, and it's actually good for them and balancing for them to have new and stimulating things happening. Here, I just picked this from Google Images, but somebody who looks suspiciously like a lawyer here, and so with the briefcase. And so this is a typical Pitta person in terms of their occupation and also their body type. So Pittas tend to be medium build, medium boned, so we're going to look at the other characteristics of them, but certainly law is a favored profession of the Pitta. So again, the qualities associated with this dosha: hot, light, intense, penetrating, pungent, sharp, acidic. So I hope you can see the differences even in the qualities. The basic underlying qualities are very different. So with Pitta, it's hot, and with Vata, it's cold. And so this is understood within the larger kind of worldview of Ayurveda as being typical of their personality and of their physical body. Pittas often are of medium size and weight. They sometimes have bright red hair. So an Ayurvedic physician would typically say if somebody has red hair or a lot of red in their hair, they're pretty much going to be a Pitta. They sometimes have baldness or thinning hair, can be common in Pitta. They have excellent digestion, which can sometimes lead them to believe that they can eat anything. This has been my experience with Pitta. They kind of pride themselves on this and they tend to push it. So because they take that for granted. They tend to have a warm body temperature. So we see with Vata that idea that they tend to have cool hands and feet. Pitta tends to have a warm body temperature. They sleep soundly for short periods of time. So they're kind of in between Vata and Kapha on this one. They can sleep soundly, but it isn't for long periods of time like the Kapha. Have good digestion, abundant energy, and a strong appetite. When out of balance, Pittas may suffer from skin rashes, burning sensation, peptic ulcers, excessive body heat, heartburn, and indigestion. So these are typical. So I've often said to people, one of the easiest things for Pitta to do in terms of just enjoying life is to not allow themselves to get hungry or hot. And so, for instance, very typical noon is considered to be the height of Pitta, and often when they're hungriest. So the term hangry, it comes from the Pittas, and anyone who has them in their lives or our Pitta will know the tendency for hunger to lead to anger. So that can be just like an easy fix, is just always having a snack available to avoid that. It's better for everybody. Pittas tend to have a strong ability to concentrate. When they're in balance, they are good decision makers, teachers, and speakers. So again, we find this idea that certain constitutions are better or attracted to certain kind of occupations. So as I was saying, Vatas often creatives, artists, dancers, that sort of occupation. Also Kaphas, typically things like social work, nursing, these kind of occupations where you have to have a lot of stamina. And Pittas, typically, as I said, lawyers, teachers, politicians, these kind of often high stress jobs appeal to Pittas. They're often precise, sharp-witted, direct, and often outspoken. Out of balance pittas can be short-tempered and argumentative. So I like this. I just include this. I thought it was funny. When pittas are overstressed, their typical response is, "What did you do wrong?" So there's that typical response of sort of blaming the other people or the world for their own anger and stress. So on the contrary, a Vata might blame themselves, for instance. So we can see very clearly here that heat and that concentration can be positive when it's channeled properly, but if it gets out of balance, it can lead to both physical and sort of emotional problems. Pitta, make choices that are cooling, sweet, and stabilizing. And again here, it's typical that when the dosha is out of balance, they want things that aren't good for them. And so it's been my experience, pittas often really crave spicy food, for instance, but according to Ayurveda, that's not a good choice for them. They should be choosing things that are cooling. Spicy foods are heating, so they're better for kapha and vata. They should balance rest and activity, allowing some free time every day, and to be careful not to create unnecessary time pressure. So this definitely can get a pitta out of balance, is excessive time pressure. And it's been my observation that they often put that on themselves, and you will always hear them say, no, it's just that I'm so busy. No, it's not that. It's that they tend to overschedule. So this is another easy fix, to just not do that, to not overschedule and to leave gaps in one's schedule. To participate in activities that don't have a goal, like swimming or walking. And again, I know somebody like this where he always wants to play something very highly competitive, even in his time off, like squash. But Ayurveda would say better to balance it out with something without a goal, especially if your job is very goal-oriented. So something like swimming is ideal because it doesn't have a goal and it's cooling. So pittas are also advised not to skip meals, and again, because they'll often get out of balance and become angry. They should favor foods that are sweet, bitter, and astringent. So they should be eating cooling foods as much as possible. Regular time in nature is very good. Obviously, it's good for all the doshas, but for pittas in particular, it's a way again to move out of that sort of obsession with goals and being highly stressed all the time. Walking by the water is ideal. Ayurvedic system, dairy is actually seen very positively, and I know this is perhaps not in fashion right now with veganism being so prominent, but from the point of view of Ayurveda, dairy, especially for pittas, can be very cooling. So, for instance, eating things like raita, which is made out of yogurt with certain spices in it. Also, sweetness is good. It can be good for pitta in moderation. So again, what's not good for kapha is good for pitta, and so on. So also, the variety of oils used for cooking vary from dosha to dosha. So for pittas, sunflower and coconut oil are better. Almond oil is also cooling. So we can see that this gets very granular in terms of Ayurveda. So if you went to an Ayurvedic physician, they would go over things like your diet. They would go through it with you. They would probably prescribe certain herbs to take. They would also suggest proper sleep schedule. So sort of all of these aspects of life would be discussed, including stress levels and so on. So those of you who've gone to naturopaths, it's a very similar thing, that is sort of like a whole life audit that gets done in order to try to move the dosha into balance.